Herzlich willkommen, lieber Lissa Rankin, Dr. Lissa Rankin. Herzlich willkommen, lieber Jeffrey Rediger, Dr. Jeffrey Rediger. Wir sind hier auf Kurs in Griechenland bei dem Kongress der IGNK 2023 und ihr habt 2 wunderbare Vorträge hier halten dürfen und wir sind sehr, sehr froh, dass wir noch ein persönliches kleines Gespräch mit euch führen dürfen. Und ja, jetzt werden wir gleich mit der ersten Frage starten, aber ich möchte meinem lieben Übersetzer das Wort erstmal geben, euch zu begrüßen.
I also say welcome to being here, and I very much enjoyed both of your talks. And Celine just welcomed you, and she also expressed her appreciation of your wonderful talks. Mm-hmm. And now we're going to have a conversation here.
Lovely.
Here on the island of Kos.
Ja. Ja, wir machen das Gespräch zweisprachig, damit auch alle, die nur Deutsch können, eure Gedanken mit aufnehmen können. Und ich werde Deutsch Fragen stellen und Claudia wird sie übersetzen, aber ihr dürft im Englischen antworten.
So the questions will be asked in German first for our listeners, and I will translate them to you. You answer in English, and this way we proceed.
Ihr habt beide, du hast ein wunderbares Thema, ich möchte es jetzt gar nicht nennen, aber der gemeinsame Nenner von euch beiden ist, glaube ich, was ich rausgehört habe, das bislang Unerklärliche in der Medizin. Du hast es auf deine Weise erforscht und du auf deine Weise, und ich würde euch jetzt gerne nacheinander einladen, das bislang Unerklärliche in der Medizin auf eure Bereiche zu erklären und zu spezifizieren.
So I'll translate the question and the thought, which is, it looks like you have a lot in common in one thing also, and that is exploring deeply into an area which so far has been the unexplainable in medicine. And you in a very special way, and you in a very special way. And now the question actually is, kannst du nochmal die Frage wiederholen?
Jeder auf seine Weise. Du hast es auf deine.
You did it in your way and you did it in your way.
Und ja, was ist deine Weise?
What is your way of probing deeply into the so far unexplainable, and what is your approach to this?
Why don't you go first, because yours is very defined.
Okay. Okay, yes. That would be me, wouldn't it?
Mine is very...
Yeah, for me, it was very important to, first of all, I followed 3 criteria. First of all, the person had to have a genuinely incurable illness according to all that we currently understand in traditional medicine. Number 2, they had to have medical evidence for accurate diagnosis and clear evidence for recovery. And number 3, no other good explanation for how they could have gotten better. In other words, there couldn't be an experimental medication or any other reason to obscure or to have played a role. So for me, medical evidence was very critical for my skeptical mind.
Du hast in deinem Vortrag viel über die sogenannte Spontanheilung gesprochen und aufgeklärt, was es mit dem Begriff auf sich hat. Vielleicht gehst du da noch ein bisschen näher drauf ein, bevor wir nachher zu Lissa kommen.
During your talk, you talked a lot, or you focused also on spontaneous remission. And you sort of questioned that term. So, so what is it? What are your thoughts about that?
Well, in medical school, we are taught that spontaneous remission is a fluke with no medical or scientific value. And that was complicated for me because if you're on the science side, you call these events spontaneous remission and are taught they have no medical value. If you are on the spiritual or religious side, you call them spiritual healing or a miracle. And I think the truth is these are black boxes that have never been opened up. Whatever language we use, they're black boxes that have never been opened up and examined with the tools of science.
Ist es eigentlich vielleicht so, dass es nie eine Spaltung hätte geben dürfen zwischen den beiden Bereichen, weil die Vor- und Altkulturen es nie gespalten haben, sondern immer in der Verbindung von Spiritualität und Körperbewusstsein waren.
Celine is wondering whether these two areas of research and thought, spirituality, religion on the one side, and modern science and medicine on the other side, once upon a time have been united, but the separation of them has caused actually the black, in my words now, the black box to become even bigger and blacker.
That's true. Yeah, that's true. And I think the history of even the island of Kos with Hippocrates and the Asclepion, in those days, mind and body and spirit were much more united and co-inhered naturally. And it was only with the rise of Western thought, the Enlightenment, Descartes, that split body from mind with a very deep chasm in between them that was unbridgeable for a number of centuries.
Alyssa.
Yeah, like I said, he's so defined. Mine was just that I experienced a real moral injury as a practicing conventional medical doctor, obstetrics and gynecologist in the United States, where I knew that there was more that I could be doing to support healing in my patients, and yet the system was set up to make that almost impossible. And so this term moral injury came about for return war veterans, where you're doing what you're told to do, but you know that you're actually causing harm when you're there to try to do something good. And so for me, I left conventional medicine in 2007, and my exploration was much more all over the map. I kind of went into, well, what else? What really causes disease? What really facilitates healing? And like you, we just met 4 years ago, so we were on these same trajectories side by side without knowing that we were both doing the same thing until we both wound up at the same conference and said, wow, we're both physicians asking what's in the black box. And for me, I became very interested in the idea of spontaneous remission. I started working with the Institute of Noetic Sciences, where they had collected over 3,000 case studies of people with incurable illnesses who had documented cures. But nobody had asked, what did you do? How did this happen? Is there anything we might learn from these case studies of, stage 4 pancreatic cancer, HIV, end-stage heart disease, like pretty much you name it, there's a case study out there. Not everything. There are definitely genetic disorders and things that, as far as I know, there's no case studies of cure. But the majority of diseases, there's at least one case study of a cure, which by definition makes it not incurable. And so I just became curious, like, is there anything, and maybe this is like part of my childhood wounding, the desire to control the seemingly uncontrollable. I wanted to know, is there anything we can do to control the outcome, or at least optimize what's possible? And so that led me down the sort of rabbit hole of what's out there in the medical literature. That led to my book, Mind Over Medicine, which came out in 2013, which was all about the scientific data around the placebo effect. What's that? That's a black box. They did an entire conference at Harvard University, where Jeffrey practices, in the 1990s, with multidisciplines from all over, ethicists and physicians and English professors and people from the divinity school, and everybody coming together to say, what is this placebo effect? And the transcript of it, written by Anne Harrington, called The Placebo Effect. It's just fascinating. But basically they came away from it saying, we have no idea. And I'm thinking, that's not good enough. So that led, the inquiry into spontaneous remission led to the inquiry into the placebo effect, which then leads you into the nocebo effect, where if we believe harm will happen, for example, you tell people this drug might cause these side effects, and they're just taking a sugar pill, and now they're getting the side effects of the drug. So both of those, and there's a lot of very mysterious stories around both of that. So I started with my interest in the science, and that became Mind Over Medicine. What do we know with science? But anybody who starts going into that black box, you start discovering that there are things that science cannot prove, cannot validate, and cannot explain. And to me, that doesn't make them nothing, right? They fall more into the qualitative, and they're not very easily quantified. So I became really interested, just for example, in the case studies. The stories themselves are not science. As far as evidence-based medicine goes, they don't even get a category of evidence. They're not evidence. But those stories, as you became interested in the stories are very instructional. We can learn a lot from the stories. So I also began collecting case studies or stories from people that had supposedly, incurable cures. And I wanted to know if there was anything that they had in common. And that led me down a rabbit hole that became much different than what I expected. I think Jeff's research was very sort of hopeful, very inspiring, very people listen to his stories and think, wow, maybe my incurable disease can become cured. I actually fell into a lot of shadow in this territory and ran into a lot of extraordinarily narcissistic healers, very abusive people, taking advantage of taking advantage of people's hope and their desire to be inspired. And so my journey took me much darker than I expected. I sort of was hoping to tell lots of magic and miracle stories, and I ended up sort of telling both. There's both. I think there's, in that territory of, for example, energy healers or faith healers or shamans, there's magic and miracles, and there's healers there's exploitation, there's rape, there's fraud, there's charlatanism, there's financial abuse, it's all there. So I kind of ended up being like, oh, let's look at the whole picture. And I would say the same is true for conventional medicine. There's magic and miracles, and there's exploitation and rape and fraud. And so I became disillusioned in one field, and I think got very idealistic. And then I kind of became disillusioned there. So I feel like now I have a much more real view of the light and the shadow of many realms of healing. So that's why I said
both conventional medicine and spiritual
healing. Sort of new age spirituality and the healing that goes on in that. And so now I have a much more sort of tempered and measured way of looking at it. But it's been actually very personal. I've learned a lot about my own personal healing and my own personal shadow. And I'm very grateful. I was not sick. I used to be on 7 medications, and part of what I told in Mind Over Medicine was the story of I haven't been on medications since I left the hospital. So I was not going on this journey for personal healing from a physical illness, but I came to discover sort of by accident that by studying some of these other healers, I was learning about the shadow in myself. And that landed me in trauma therapy and working on my boundaries and learning how I was being harmed inadvertently and how I was causing harm inadvertently, and how we as healers are in a very vulnerable place with our patients and clients together. It's a vulnerable relationship, but what I became most interested in was what is the most healing version of that therapeutic relationship, and how do we do that well? So I've been training doctors for 10 years now based on some of what I've learned. That was a long answer.
Well, no, and maybe one thing worth saying is that I think it's true for both of us. Even though we've been studying the most incurable illnesses, it's not really about that so much, because all of the major killers now we know that 85 to 90% of what people suffer from, including all the major killers, are lifestyle illnesses, right? And so heart disease, diabetes, lung disease, cancer, autoimmune illness, these are lifestyle illnesses. And if we can apply just a fraction of what these ultimate achievers in health and well-being have applied in their situation, we'd be able to lessen the burden of suffering for many, many people.
Well, and what he calls lifestyle illnesses, I call trauma-induced illnesses.
Yeah, good point.
Because lifestyle sounds like all I have to do is change my diet and quit smoking and exercise. And my conclusion was that that's the easy part. And the much more difficult part is looking at what traumas made us not even be willing to take care of ourselves. What makes us overeat or become addicts or throw ourselves under the bus caregiving other people and not even standing up for ourselves or saying no
until
or getting
the body
enough
says
sleep.
no, right?
Until the body says no, right? So it's both. It's trauma and lifestyle.
Würdet ihr sagen, es ist jetzt die Zeit, dass wir in zweierlei Richtungen uns durchleuchten und vielleicht das Heilige in uns finden, damit wir das Beste von uns auch der Welt schenken können. Und Menschen, die sich mit Medizin oder mit der Psyche oder mit unserer ganzheitlichen Gesundheit beschäftigen, sind wie die Speerspitze. Die trifft es zuallererst. Das heißt, Sie sind das Reinheitsgebot für die Kraft Ihrer Arbeit.
Would you say that we live in a time when now we are getting ready to look into the sacred within us, the health within us, which is there, and you guys being where you are in your profession and dealing with these people are like the forerunners in this development that we are actually is a cultural development that we are in. This is the way I understood your question.
Well, what I think is, I think we study the forerunners. I think we are privileged to be able to hear these stories, and these people are the real forerunners of a new kind of health and well-being, and they want us to study how they healed. Traditional medicine, we don't study how people heal. We only, as a physician, I was taught to make a diagnosis and start a medication, and that's as far as it goes. We don't study how people heal. Now, I think naturopaths and people who work in more integrative fashion have been ahead of the game for a while. And integrative medicine is just beginning to take hold in some places, but it's still not what the mainstream or most people even know about. Most of the people I work with have no idea what integrative medicine is yet. They think that the doctor is the expert on their life and body, even though he or she sees them for 15 minutes at most. and then they think their job is to be compliant with the doctor's prescription to take a medication. And that only helps people tread water. It heals nothing.
Ich glaube, ihr seid diejenigen, die Angebote machen, wie es auch anders geht.
You are the ones who offer different options, how it could go differently than what you just described.
We have a responsibility, a moral responsibility to study how people heal.
I think part of what Jeff is pointing to is that most of the people that we personally met who were cured from end-stage cancers after they had been sent home on hospice, or who had end-stage heart disease and are now running marathons or whatever. These people, they said no doctor has ever cared about how I did this. Like, you guys are the first people. Like, it's their reaction from their doctors was that the doctors got angry. How dare you get cured when you're supposed to die? How dare you get cured?
Right.
No, really, like, I love the story of stomatis moritis, which I told in one of my books, I can't remember now which one, who was a Greek-American man from Ikaria who came to the U.S., wound up with lung cancer. They told him, you're going to die, but we can give you sort of palliative treatment to extend your life a little bit. And he had a wife, and he said, well, that's dumb. I shouldn't spend my money if I'm going to die anyway. I might as well go back to Ikaria, and we'll save the money. And so he came back to his little village where everybody was coming to meet him, and there, you know, he's sick, he can barely breathe, but he's feeling well enough to plant a garden. He's thinking, well, they told me 9 months I'll be dead, so at least my wife will be able to harvest my vegetables. And his old friends are inviting him back to the church. He's going to the local festivities. People are bringing him wine. He's having a cigar or two. Everybody's playing checkers with him. And anyway, long story short, he gets back into the Ikaria way of life. And 25 years later, he decides to go back to the United States to find his doctors and say, what happened? And all of his doctors were dead.
Yeah.
So he couldn't ask.
And he died, depending on who you ask. This was written up in the New York Times, so they couldn't find the birth records. He was either 98 or 102. But this was something like 50 years after he was diagnosed.
It is said that people from Ikaria get very old. This has been researched.
Yes.
It's one of the places.
It's one of the blue zones, right?
The blue zones, where they've been eating the Mediterranean diet and sitting for hours in community, sharing stories, loving each other for hundreds of years.
But I think of that story as one of the examples of like the doctors. It's almost, I can say this because I'm a doctor. I can say this about doctors. We almost feel insulted that we're not actually the sole reason for cure. If somebody else gets cured and we had nothing to do with it, it's like a narcissistic injury.
Well, and I think, often what the people who have gotten better who tell me about their experiences with the doctors, the good ones will say, well, whatever you're doing, keep doing it because it's working. But they're not curious. I mean, if people are getting better after you've told them they're going to die, shouldn't we be curious about how they got better? I mean, it's just so astonishing. We need that curiosity.
So I think both of us became very humbled by these kinds of patients. But I also think it's really important to acknowledge that there's a tendency to make those kinds of patients special, and then the ones that don't get cured, well, you're not as special. So I think we have to be very careful whenever we're talking about this kind of information, because I think Jeff and I sort of differ in this way. I don't think every cure can be earned. And I don't know why some people do the exact same thing, and they're good people, they're earnest people, they're disciplined people, they're hardworking, they're trying to become the Olympian of their, Jeff calls them health outliers. They're trying to become the Olympian of their diagnosis. And they don't become
But we all die at some point, and I think there are reasons inscrutable in the soul about, and this is an area of study that needs study, but we can't help everyone recover, because it's not, all of us will die at some point. And so I think we need to have some humility about these situations, like you're saying.
Like we like to think, well, if conventional medicine doesn't work, then what we teach, now this will cure you, or now you're going to go and get trauma therapy and this will cure you. But we don't know is really, at the end of the day, the most honest thing that any healer can say. We don't know.
But it's not one size fits all in every situation. It's a unique pathway for every person, I think.
Ich glaube, es ist mehr die Energie, die von dem Menschen ausgeht, der zu euch kommt und der sich mit euch verbindet. Und ich glaube auch, dass die Ärzte selber als Stellvertreter einer Medizin in einem Quantensprung sind, jetzt in einer Wende sind und erkennen müssen, dass sie eben nicht die mechanistischen Gesundheitshelfer sind, sondern mehr auch durch ihr eigenes inneres Heilsein und vielleicht auch holy werden, den anderen die Erlaubnis geben, selber holy zu werden, ohne sie zu reparieren und sich dann zu sagen, oh, das hast du aber jetzt toll gemacht, sondern zu sagen, schau, ich gebe dir was von meiner Energie und ich helfe dir auch mit meinen Kenntnissen, aber durch mich wirkt etwas Größeres. Und ich glaube, da begegnet sich vielleicht die Wissenschaft mit einem anderen Bereich, der euch auch hilft oder der, glaube ich, allen.
This was quite a lot. I tried to get the gist of it and the main points, because there were a few pearls in there what you said, and I tried to remember them and put them on a chain. A necklace maker. The first thing is what you pointed out, if I remember correctly, is that what is really important here is the energy that the patient brings along and your energy that might resonate and it might empower the self-healing in a person, or might not. You are the new kind of healers and doctors who don't understand themselves as people who repair patients. It's not repairing them, but you might be a means or a channel for something higher that you humbly serve for the benefit of the patient, but it's not you who does the actual healing job. Did I get it?
Yeah.
Well, and I think we are in the cradle of Western civilization here, right? This is where Socrates and the great teachers helped form the basis of Western civilization. And Socrates said that the teacher is a midwife, right? And so this is something you know a lot about, but the truth is within all of us. And healers, you study the healers, I've studied healers. Healers are characters a lot of times, but the healing doesn't come from the healer. The healer only activates or helps give birth to that which is within all of us, which is what your point is, it sounds like. So
it looks like, in my words, continue what I felt you were about to say. It's not a mechanistic thing that the doctor treats the patient. It is a mediation of something higher. You could even call it spiritual. It's going to happen. And our dear friend Hartmut Schröder, who has his place in Berlin, it's called Therapeum. It's where he and his wife practice, and there are also other people who practice, and I will never forget when several years ago, the first time he showed it to me and showed me around a beautiful old villa with a garden, and said, this is where healing can happen. And I think that's a very beautiful way of saying it. So what I hear you say, what I hear him say, and what is the new and most ancient understanding of healing is, help it to happen, but let thy will be done.
Create the conditions, like create a garden. And cultivate the garden of our life in a way that healing, all we can do is create conditions. We can't heal anything ourselves, for sure.
Well, what I hear you saying, and maybe this is what you're pointing to, is as facilitators of healing, if I have done my work and I am not bringing an agenda into the room, I am just here as an open vessel for whatever is possible here. And I am in internal family systems that I practice. We call it self with a capital S. I call it your inner pilot light. Every religion has a name for Christ consciousness or Buddha nature, Atman. If I am able to be in that divine part of myself while I'm with an individual or a community, being here with the whole community, and I can hold that frequency, there is the possibility for entrainment of bringing other people into the frequency of that part of themselves, and to activate something we all have, every one of us. Nobody, it cannot be damaged. You cannot get rid of it, but it can sort of get clouded over by trauma or conditioning or
wearing down by life.
Education, even, circumstances. And we can forget. And this dampens the life force, right? And that can have all kinds of implications. But if we can activate the life force within ourselves and spark that inner pilot light in other people, I do believe it can be kind of contagious. Sort of like the metronomes, you see these videos of the metronomes, and I do actually
the way they train with each other.
Yeah, they entrain with one another. And I actually believe it's more, this is my part of my personal work, I believe it's more healing when there's more of us. And I'm looking to decentralize the healer altogether. If we can all light up together, and that's why you saw me at the conference I like singing, I like dancing, I like being in communities where we're activating that self energy, that inner pilot light. We're lighting each other up, and it's like a match that, you know, we can all, anybody who's available for it can drink from that well together. And I believe that if we create those kinds of conditions for healing, and we do it in nature, I'm also a big proponent for not being in a closed room with no windows, but being outside by the ocean, being with the trees and the grass. And
now that doesn't sound like a doctor's office.
I know, that's why I don't actually work in a doctor's office.
A dark doctor's office.
So I think that's why some of these retreat centers or pilgrimage sites that people go to, they're in places of beauty, they're outside. We're going to be going to the Asclepian.
It's definitely such a place.
This is such a place, right? And so I always think of it as a sort of prayer, like, let whatever is possible here. May I be available for whatever is possible here with another person to hold that potential with me, and if possible, in community of all of us coming together to hold that potential. And many times that's where strange things happen. I can't explain them, no matter how much I've been studying. 15 years now I've been researching this stuff. There are still things that I cannot explain. But if I were God, the mystery, the universe, I don't think I would want everything to be explainable. Like,
Genau, das ist der Punkt.
how would we ever humble ourselves and say, I'm sick, help, if we could control it all?
Ja, genau.
Surrender.
Ja.
Warum müssen wir alles kontrollieren?
Ja.
Warum können wir nicht einfach uns berühren lassen? Und in dem, wo wir uns berühren lassen, sind wir Teil von allem. Wir müssen doch gar keine Angst haben.
It is sufficient that we get touched by what we experience. We don't have to understand, to explain it in every detail all the time. And when I was listening to you, so okay,
Of course.
When I was listening to you, I was like, what does explain actually mean? And I remembered Socrates saying, you mentioned him before, and the literal translation of what he said was not, as I learned the other day, he didn't say, I know that I know nothing. What he did say was, I know that I don't know.
Well, and the roots of to understand actually mean to stand under, which means to surrender to something. So that maybe touches on a little bit of that too.
And I think that piece is important. In Mind Over Medicine, I taught what I called the 6 steps to healing yourself. And originally, in 2013, when I wrote the book, step 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 is here's everything you can possibly do to optimize your chance of cure. And then step 6 is surrender, right? Okay, I've done everything. Now let me let go of attachment to outcomes. And I rewrote the book in 2020, and I changed the order. I said, why do we surrender last? Like, last resort? No. Let's surrender first.
It is the first thing.
Others may add on to it.
And to me, the surrender is that surrender to the divine part of ourselves in community. So it's, I mean, if some people believe in a transcendent God, that's fine. Surrender to God, surrender to a redwood tree, surrender to the temple of Asclepian. Like, it doesn't matter. But that letting go of control, letting go of thinking that we can make it happen.
Because that's what helps us enter into the new world of understanding that allows new information or new knowledge or healing to occur. It's giving up the old beliefs. It's giving up the false beliefs.
Es ist Eintauchen in das Quantenfeld. Kann man so sagen vielleicht? Oder es ist in das große wissende
merging
Feld?
Into the quantum field?
I mean, I'll keep it more grounded, and I'll say it takes us out of a stress response in the nervous system and puts us into the parasympathetic healing, the ventral vagal parasympathetic healing response. As long as we're grasping, clinging, trying to make it happen, it's stressful. And if we're able to go into that place of surrender, if you put people on monitors, the nervous system relaxes, and we know that's the healing We know that's the healing. We can talk quantum, we can talk the transcendent, but at least that we know for sure.
Well,
Je weniger
yes.
Konzepte, desto mehr Heilung.
Whatever concepts we have is fine, but they're just concepts.
Yeah.
And you describe the concept that everyone can agree with without having to take recourse to any other. But the way you describe this holding on to, you know, for me, if I may join, for me, this is a culturally imposed self-enslavement.
Yes, that's a big topic. Absolutely true. Indoctrination. Lissa and I spend hours and hours and hours talking about the ways in which we have been indoctrinated first by fundamentalist religion and then by medical school. And there's a lot that goes with that around, and spiritual healers around the narcissism and the different set of rules that they will teach a certain kind of morality but be living a different kind of morality too often. There's a lot. It's a big topic.
Well, the pandemic and the Me Too movement changed a lot in the field of healing. You know,
very true.
We saw so many people in the spiritual healing that were anti-vax, anti-public health measures. Like I was like, oh no, this is not healing. You know, so it became very polarized. And so we got a lot. We actually learned a lot, I think, recently about you know, what's good about those movements and what's potentially dangerous about those movements. Neither of us have ever stopped being conventional medical doctors just because we became open and curious. So I think it's important to consider there's so many different kinds of medicines, and so the future that I see is a true integration of these medicines. It's not either natural holistic medicine or and we throw out everything that in conventional medicine, or it's just conventional medicine and we don't believe anything spiritual and we don't believe in nutrition or natural medicine. It really truly needs to be integrative, and that has not happened in most of the communities that I'm in. They're still pretty polarized.
Yeah, and to create a medicine like you all have been talking about this week that is built on what's right and special about each human being, and also is trauma informed and understands the ways in which the events of life just wear down so many minds and bodies until disease becomes what happens. Whether it's, I mean, the body does say no when we finally become worn down enough.
Well, and that's, I mean, in Jeff's work, he talks about the 4 pillars in your book, Cured. And the 4th pillar is sort of the shift in identity that happens when people are on a healing journey, when they decide, for example, wait a minute, I'm going to stop being a doormat. Everybody feels entitled to all kinds of crap that they're not actually entitled to from me, and I haven't even consented to these things. And I'm going to start saying no, and I'm going to start protecting myself and having my own back and having boundaries and, like, you know, prioritizing my needs. And then, boom, their cancer goes away. It's like, well, that's interesting.
Well, and it's a really big topic, right?
Because we both saw this over and over
again. And it's so often that say, if a person is told that they have 6 months to live, well, at one level they're terrified when they hear that, but then there's another part that sometimes, more often than you would think, that says, wow, if I've only got 6 months to live, I guess I don't have to take over the family business like Dad's putting pressure on me to do, or I don't need to go to law school just because my family thinks I need to. And so that itself, the death of, or the surrender of this false self that creates the possibility of the birth of a more authentic self, that in itself sometimes becomes the pathway to giving up some false beliefs, to living a life that's more authentic to themselves, to saying no to things that are really not in their best interests. And so there's so many things that go with this.
Well, and that is kind of the spiritual healing, right? That is that sort of emergence of the divine self,
right?
Right,
Whether
like,
it happens in 10 minutes or 10 years.
Und so gehört es letztlich auch zusammen, dass man manches Mal etwas sehr Dunkles anschauen muss, um dann wie mit einem, jetzt ist es schon egal, jetzt kann ich mich sozusagen für meine ganze Wahrheit, für meine innere Heiligkeit, für das Große, für die Anbindung öffnen und dann geschieht oft das, was wir nicht beschreiben können.
Yeah. What you're saying is, if I get it right, what you're saying is sometimes we have to face extreme darkness and hopeless aporia in ancient Greek, that we are able to let go of what we were holding on to for a long time, and then new horizons and new light can open.
Well, when the Reformation started in Germany, Martin Luther said, "The face of the void becomes the face of God." And that was a very famous phrase. He said it in German, but I say it in English.
Ihr beide seid hier zu dem Kongress gekommen, weil ihr Hartmut Schröder, glaube ich, kennt, oder du kennst ihn. Und uns würde noch interessieren, ja, was verbindest du jetzt hier mit diesem Kongress? Was verbindet ihr hier mit diesem Kongress? Was verbindet euch mit der IGNK?
So the question is, it looks like you met, or Hartmut Schröder met you something. So how did you get connected with this conference and with this Internationale Gesellschaft für Naturheilkunde, which there is no English translation, that organization that actually heads it and runs it, that International Society for Natural and Cultural Healing?
Well, Hartmut reached out to me. I'm not sure how he found out about me. And he said, would you please come and be part of this group of healers and healthcare practitioners and doctors, and we will be meeting on the island of Hippocrates, of Kos, and we'll be going to the Asclepian, to this healing temple, and I felt so honored. I've never been here. I've never been to Greece. It's very far away. I'm from California. Yeah. And I said, wow, this sounds like an amazing experience, because like I said, I really care about community, and I care about pilgrimage. And I thought, well, this will be for myself a pilgrimage, but I'll be coming with others in community to make a pilgrimage. And then I said, well, if you're interested in my work, you should check out my partner, because his work is very similar. And so Hartmut looked up Jeff, and then we were both invited. So yeah, it's a pleasure to be here among all of you.
But it's not your first time in Greece, is it?
No, I have a dear friend who's a physician, and his family comes from Sparta in Greece, and so he every year invites me to go to Greece, and I come when I can. And he's very Spartan.
So Sparty, as it is called to them. I know the place very well.
Yeah.
But when you think of pilgrimage in Greece, the most sacred place of pilgrimage in Greece, if you ask me, is Delphi.
That's where we were hoping to go.
Right. Go to Delphi.
Right. Yes.
This is one of the hot spots on the planet.
Yes.
Yeah.
We tried.
We do want to do that, and my friend is saying the same thing.
Yeah.
So
we will come back with.
Yeah, we do want to do
Chris.
that.
We'll come back with Chris.
Chris will take us. Yeah, right.
Absolutely.
Yes. Yes.
Vielleicht finden wir zum Abschluss noch eine kleine Vision, eine Idee für alle, die zuschauen und die hoffentlich dann auch in eure Werke eintauchen können, die ihr geschrieben habt. Ihr habt euch ja beide viel auch mit den Kindern beschäftigt, vor allen Dingen. Und was kann jeder für sich tun? Was ist eure Vision? Ist es vielleicht die Anbindung an das innere Kind wiederzufinden, um all diesen neuen Bewegungen oder auch einer inneren Gesundheit zuzuarbeiten?
The question is, and it almost is asking for a recommendation that you can give to everyone, probably not only our listeners, but everyone, is how can we support the development that you are supporting in your work with a focus also on children? And how about the inner child in each and every one of us? Is that something to look into, to look at, to invite, that could help that growth and evolution that you are promoting?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I personally care a lot about doing what we can to help children grow up without experiencing more child abuse than they already do. We live in a world where, at least in the United States, 1 out of 3 girls grows up and is sexually abused before age 18, and boys, 1 out of 3 to 5 is sexually abused before age 18. And there's a lot of physical abuse and things that go on. And we know on the basis of research like the ACE research that trauma plays a lot of a huge role in what eventuates in the physical illnesses of the body in adults. So it's certainly true that the body does keep the score. The body does tell the story when we have the ears to listen. And trauma is such a big deal of what we need to do. So I think that is there's a piece of research that I've been very interested in lately around children, because you mentioned the inner child lately, and we all need to learn how to unconditionally love and find a place to just nurture and love the little child within us that sometimes didn't get what's needed when they were young. Some piece of this that has become a doorway for me recently was there was this sociologist from Berkeley who looked into the research for what separated out those children who, what separated out the people who hid Jews in World War II at great cost to themselves, and what the individuals who mostly, and most of them were religious people, but went ahead and became part of the Nazi world. And so this researcher did a lot of work around that. Over 700 interviews, and the biggest thing that shook out in the research was that the less than 0.5% of individuals who hid Jews at great cost to themselves had been raised in families without corporal punishment as children. And instead of corporal punishment, which is the belief that the one with the biggest stick rules, it was a family instead that sat the children down, had empathy for their situation, taught them empathy for others, and helped them think about what is right and wrong, to reason that out. But I thought that situation of empathy when a child does something wrong, and then teaching them about right and wrong, is very different than an environment where corporal punishment, which easily becomes a situation of cruelty, and it teaches the child a world that the one with the biggest stick wins. That's a very different kind of morality. And I've been experiencing that both personally and professionally as the doorway into a very different way of thinking. So I think the inner child is important. And so as adults, many of us were not raised in a situation where there was complete empathy for all the different parts of who we are as children. And so how do we as adults begin to love that inner child, create that kind of empathy for the different contradictory impulses and needs that didn't get addressed, perhaps? It's a lot of work around trauma recovery that I think is important there. And I know you've thought a lot about this as well.
Well, yeah, and I think this is there's an answer for the parents and an answer for the children and an answer for the adults and their inner children. So they're kind of 3 different answers. I mean, I think these kinds of, in internal family systems, we call them legacy burdens or generational traumas. We pass them down. The traumas that I experienced from my family, if I don't break the chain, then I give them to my 17-year-old daughter. And I became very motivated to do my own trauma healing work about 9 years ago, because I did not want my daughter to have to re-experience the trauma that I went through, which was mostly you're only lovable if you're perfect, you're only lovable if you're high performing and achieving, you're only lovable if you're a good little Christian girl who doesn't make any mistakes, who doesn't break any rules, who's obedient and compliant and people pleasing and all of that. And there's unconditional love is not on the menu, so you settle for conditional approval and you become this approval junkie, and it's horrible. It's horrible. It's a hamster wheel. There's no there. You're never going to get there.
Exhausting.
And I did not want my daughter. I started seeing the parts of her that are like, she's getting approval, she's getting straight A's, and I'm going, oh no, So I think it's important, first of all, for us to be able to go back to that child in me that was maybe 3 or 4 and learned, okay, unconditional love is not on the menu. But if I get the lead in the school musical or the church solo, the cheerleader, and make straight, then okay, then people like me, right? So that inner child in ourselves needs to be healed and treated with cutting-edge trauma therapies and somatic therapies and things like this. And we as parents need to recognize that so that we don't pass these patterns of control or domination or, you know, these adverse childhood experiences of trauma that we now know that these a dose-dependent level of these kinds of traumas decreases life expectancy by 20 years. So, you know, I think it's a huge public health issue, the awareness about preventing trauma and once it's happened, getting treatment for it. Prevention, of course, is much more effective. So educating parents about things like developmental trauma, this is part of what I'm very interested in, educating teachers, because, you know, parents may be doing a great job, but if they're getting traumatized at school, so that, you know, it's all of the impact of our young people. I think this is extraordinarily important, but it's never too late.
Nein.
It's never too late.
Und ich glaube, wir dürfen auch Fehler machen. Ich glaube, das ist ganz wichtig, dass wir uns auch als Erwachsene auf den Weg begeben, unser Kind wiederzuentdecken und dem Kind zu zeigen, wir dürfen Fehler machen, auch als Erwachsene. Ich bin nicht perfekt. Ich habe Fehler gemacht und es tut mir wahnsinnig leid. Aber ich versuche es ab jetzt besser zu machen. Und ich bin manchmal auch gehindert. Also ich versuche das mit meinem Sohn manches Mal auch. Schau, ich muss auch noch lernen. Yeah?
So that as parents, we don't pretend to be perfect, and that's in that way of dealing with it. We can also admit, sorry, I made a mistake.
Absolutely.
You know, I'm learning, I'm in process, work in process, just like as you are. And sorry, I screwed up.
And
the repair is really an important piece of it, right?
Yes.
Absolutely.
Learning with the children and learning from the children, just in watching them.
Yes, and it's never too late for us to reparent ourselves.
Of course.
So that inner pilot light, divine self, it can also be perfect mommy, perfect daddy, perfect healer, perfect therapist. Like, we have a capacity within ourselves to repair. You were talking about repair. To repair what our parents weren't able to give us.
Right.
And we can do it anytime. Even if something harmed us yesterday, we can repair what got harmed yesterday by bringing that unconditional love that many of us didn't get to the parts of us that get hurt over time. And in internal family systems, we talk about many parts of us. And all of those parts we can redo it. And we can repattern the neurology this way. We can form new neural highways by giving those parts of us that got hurt what they didn't get back then, and starting to rewire, make new highways of what should have happened. What should have happened?
Statt Highways, lieber Landstraßen.
In English, a highway can also be a curvy road.
Oh, yeah.
Nice lines. A highway is not a freeway.
Yes, yes. I live on Highway 1. It's very, very California Highway 1. Yes.
I live in Boston. There's no square blocks in Boston.
So I think for today, I thank you very much.
I'd add one point that I didn't translate, but it fits in to it, and that is,
go for it.
When we look at this conversation and what you say, aren't we in a situation in human history where we are about and able to take a quantum leap? This is a chance that we didn't have for hundreds and hundreds of years.
Well, I think the pandemic certainly changed everything.
It did.
It's like,
it did.
Yes.
And we do have a moral responsibility to help end the era of disease and medications and begin to open an era like integrated medicine is doing so beautifully, where we study how people heal, where we help people heal and not just take a medication or a procedure.
Könnte vielleicht die gemeinsame Botschaft für uns allen sein, dass wir unsere Erfahrungen teilen und offen für Begegnungen und Berührungen sind.
So a common message from all of us to everyone else could be. That we share our experiences, our learnings, that we get touched by one another and proceed in that process, which is the real human evolution.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.